Hello and welcome to Bowl of Ideas, the podcast discussing all things poetry. My name is James Carter-Geddes. I read English literature at the University of St Andrews, and I am the host of this podcast. Why should you listen to some lowly student ramble on about poets and their works when you could plug into professional podcasters and academics with much more experience? Well, I don't know really. You tuned into this podcast. Come and join me as I invite a very special guest each episode to discuss their favourite poet. We will read together, laugh together, and maybe even cry together, but all in the good name of poetry. So, give us a follow, drop us a like, and enjoy this episode of Bowl of Ideas. Hello and welcome. Today I'm joined by Mrs. Katrina Crawford, former sub-editor for the Times supplements. It's a pleasure to have you on, Katrina. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for asking me, James.
And I feel like to get to know you better, we should find out 3 fun facts about yourself. So take us away.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, 3 fun facts. Well, I can give you 3 facts about myself. Let me think. What's most interesting about me? I am a twin, which is quite interesting. Not many people fall into that category. I now work in a university library, which is very relevant to our subject today. And I once went to a tango class with Clive James, which I think your older listeners will appreciate more than your younger.
Thank you. That's great. Good to get an insight there. And the librarian thing we'll come back to in a second, because today we are looking at the Bard of Coventry, who was born in 1922. He is a renowned English poet and novelist, also a librarian at the University of Hull from 1955 until his death in 1985. He kind of cultivated the image of a no-nonsense, reserved Englishman. He had little interest in fame. He turned down an OBE in 1968. He turned down the position of Poet Laureate in 1984. And finally, he was a big fan of jazz and wrote articles about it for the Daily Telegraph. Who am I talking about today? Who are we talking about?
We are talking about the one and only, the unique Philip Larkin.
Exactly, yes, Philip Larkin. And I always like to ask guests this question to start off with. Can you list some of his main themes before we get into his poetry? What's he most concerned with as a poet?
Yeah, sure. He is, I would say most people know him as somebody who's very preoccupied with mortality. So a lot of his poems talk about the progress of life that leads inevitably to death. He's also very interested in tradition, faith, love, and social convention. And I think in almost all of his very good poems, there is a sense of being a solitary observer and an outsider. So while he's drawn to tradition, he doesn't necessarily participate in it in a conventional sense.
Very helpful, thank you. That's great to get a good image at the start. And I'm sure we'll come back to a lot of those as we look at his poetry. So without much further ado, I think we will read one of his poems. What do you have for us today?
Well, I've got one of his most famous poems, which is The Whitsun Weddings. It covers a lot of the themes that we've just talked about.
Lovely. Well, please take it away. The Whitsun Weddings by Philip Larkin.
That Whitsun, I was late getting away. Not till about 1:20 on the sunlit Saturday did my 3/4 empty train pull out. All windows down, all cushions hot, all sense of being in a hurry gone. We ran behind the backs of houses, crossed a street of blinding windscreens, smelt the fish dock. Thence the river's level drifting breadth began, where Skye and Lincolnshire and water meet. All afternoon through the tall heat that slept for miles inland, a slow and stopping curve southwards we kept. Wide farms went by, short-shadowed cattle, and canals with floatings of industrial froth. A hothouse flashed uniquely, hedges dipped and rose, and now and then a smell of grass displaced the reek of buttoned carriage cloth, until the next town, new and nondescript, approached with acres of dismantled cars. At first I didn't notice what a noise the weddings made. Each station that we stopped at, sun destroys the interest of what's happening in the shade, and down the long cool platforms, whoops and skulls I took for porters larking with the mails, and went on reading. Once we started, though, we passed them, grinning and pomaded, girls in parodies of fashions, heels and veils, all posed irresolutely, watching us go, as if out on the end of an event, waving goodbye to something that survived it. Struck, I leant more promptly out next time, more curiously, and saw it all again in different terms. The fathers with broad belts under their suits and seamy foreheads, mothers loud and fat, and uncles shouting smut, and then the perms, the nylon gloves and jewellery substitutes, the lemons, mauves and olive ochres that marked off the girls unreally from the rest. Yes, from cafes and banquet halls up yards and bunting-dressed coach party annexes, the wedding days were coming to an end. All down the line, fresh couples climbed abroad. The rest stood still. And the last confetti and advice were thrown, and as we moved, each face seemed to define just what it saw departing. Children frowned at something dull. Fathers had never known success so huge and wholly farcical. The women shared the secret like a happy funeral, while girls, gripping their handbags tighter, stared at a religious wounding. Free at last and loaded with the sum of all they saw, we hurried towards London, shuffling gouts of steam. Now fields were building plots and poplars cast long shadows over major roads, and for some 50 minutes that in time would seem just long enough to settle hats and say, I nearly died. A dozen marriages got underway. They watched the landscape sitting side by side. An Odeon went past, a cooling tower, and someone running up to bowl, and none thought of the others they would never meet, or how their lives would all contain this hour. I thought of London spread out in the sun, in its postal districts packed like squares of wheat. There we were aimed, and as we raced across bright knots of rail past standing Pullmans, walls of blackened moss came close, and it was nearly done. This frail travelling coincidence, and what it held stood ready to be loosed with all the power that being changed can give. We slowed again, and as the Titan brakes took hold, there swelled a sense of falling, like an arrow shower sent out of sight, somewhere becoming rain.
Thank you, beautifully read.
Thanks.
And a lovely poem as well.
Yes.
Quite emblematic of a lot of his themes, isn't it? They all kind of come together in the Whitsun Weddings.
They do, yes. So, yes, I mean, I think to start with, characteristic Larkin is that we start with some sort of mundane, trivial detail. The time that his train went, the fact that it was 3/4 empty, and then it builds up the momentum of the train. Loads of trains in Larkin. Larkin loves a train because a train is set on a track at the start. The journey is an inevitability. It leads somewhere.
Right.
And that is a very strong theme throughout his poems.
And where does the train go then in this poem?
So it's sort of a journey through life, I suppose. So he is again a solitary person watching. He comes across a very everyday thing, which is the weddings. Now, it's very easy with Larkin to find your feet because we recognise a lot of the things that he talks about.
Yes.
There's no grandiose language. It's all very rooted in everyday life. So he's talking about the girls, the mums loud and fat, uncles shouting smut, nylon gloves, jewellery substitutes. And then we've got some very marketing speak here, referring to the colours, lemons, mauves and olive ochres. It's a land in the 1950s where the welfare state's been established. People live very comfortably.
Yes.
Living standards have got better and unemployment very low. It's about what people fill their lives with, I guess. And yes, so we've sort of reached marriage and the usual social conventions of life, which would be marriage, children, and then, unfortunately, as Larkin always points out, sort of death at the end.
Yes, do you think he's a pessimist? Because I know a lot of people do say, oh, Larkin, he's always on about death and he's so miserable and he's, writing at the edge of society with the welfare state. Would you call him a pessimist or a realist?
I would call him a realist. I think he's honest. A lot of his poetry asks a question but then doesn't answer it.
Yes.
he likes to look a question in the eye, a difficult question, a difficult theme. I think as I see his intent, it is honesty. It's not flinching from difficult things. You can see in the Whitsun Weddings that people, and in a lot of his poetry, people fill their lives with stuff, possibly to avoid looking at difficult things in life. He doesn't do that. I don't find him a pessimist. I actually find his poetry quite comforting. I think he appreciates all facets of life, and he understands the significance of life without always coming to conclusions. I quite like that.
Yes.
I see why people call him a pessimist. Yes, of course.
Yeah, and you're not alone, actually. There have been many critics who have said he's actually an optimist in their minds. So
interesting.
Yeah, it's interesting to get that.
Yes.
Could you tell us a bit more then about what the Whitsun Weddings is about as a poem and what it does for you?
Yes, so it's another one of great life's questions. So we've gone through the trivial, we've gone through the weddings. We know that he's watching on. Larkin likes these sort of big occasions that represent life, markers in life.
Yes.
I would say this is a poem that doesn't come to any strong conclusion. What we do know is he feels that he's joined in a communal event. There's lots of we at the end, so it's a shared experience, which is quite nice. A lot of people say he sort of is a little bit sneery about people, but actually I find he often identifies with people who maybe aren't in the same social class as him, maybe have different experience with him, but he sees them united because they all go through life.
Yes.
And deal with it in different ways. The ending to me is unclear. There's no definite conclusion. There's a reference to heading to London, an arrow shower that splits and becomes rain, so they're all going to go their separate ways. But for part of the day and for a lot of life, they all go through the same experiences.
Yes, no, I agree, and that's also a helpful point you made about his kind of like universality with class and human experience, because Larkin himself was educated at home until the age of 8, actually, by his mother and sister, who was 10 years older than him.
Didn't know that.
It's strange because he then he progressed to the junior school in Coventry, where he grew up, and got into Oxford, St John's, and left with a first, much to his own surprise, actually.
Okay.
So I guess what I'm getting at is, how did his upbringing, his own kind of social position, contribute to his views in his poetry?
Well, that's interesting to hear that, because you often feel like he has very little agency in certain things, that he finds himself in places maybe against his expectation. So to hear that he was educated at home, which is probably unusual, he must have not been sort of socialised in that way very early on. There's a poem, Dockery and Son, where he goes back to his Oxford college. There's a lot of talk about hierarchy in it, and lineage and family lineage.
Yes.
Of course, this never happened to him. He didn't have children. He never married. He sort of skirts around the outside of that. And I wonder if from an early age he's been sort of set off on the path of being put into traditional settings, but never quite belonging. And that's where probably his poetry was a slightly therapeutic activity, because it enabled him to understand himself within those traditions.
Great. So you mentioned Dockery and Son earlier. I wondered if you could actually read that poem. I think it's such a great one that we shouldn't miss.
Yes, I'd be happy to, James. Right, Dockery and Son. Dockery was junior to you, wasn't he? Said the Dean. His son's here now, Death-suited, visitant, I nod. And do you keep in touch with, or remember how black-gowned, unbreakfasted and still half-tight we used to stand before that desk to give our version of these incidents last night? I try the door of where I used to live, locked. The lawn spreads dazzlingly wide, a known bell chimes. I catch my train ignored. Canal and clouds and colleges subside slowly from view. But Dockery, good Lord, anyone up today must have been born in 43 when I was 21. If he was younger, did he get this son at 19, 20? Was he that withdrawn, high-collared public school boy, sharing rooms with Cartwright who was killed? Well, it just shows how much, how little. Yawning, I suppose I fell asleep, waking at the fumes and furnace glares of Sheffield where I changed and ate an awful pie and walked along the platform to its end to see the range joining and parting lines reflect a strong, unhindered moon. To have no son, no wife, no house or land still seemed quite natural. Only a numbness registered the shock of finding out how much of life had gone, how widely from the others. Dockery now, only 19, he must have taken stock of what he wanted and been capable of... No, that's not the difference. Rather, how convinced he was that he should be added to. Why did he think adding meant increase? To me, it was dilution. Where do these innate assumptions come from? Not from what we think truest or most want to do. Those warp tight shut like doors. They're more a style our lives bring with them. Habit for a while. Suddenly they harden into all we've got. And how we got it. Looked back on, they rear like sand clouds, thick and close, embodying for Dockery a son, for me nothing. Nothing with all a son's harsh patronage. Life is first boredom, then fear. Whether or not we use it, it goes, and leaves what something hidden from us chose, an age, and then the only end of age.
Thank you again. Very well read. It's another very meaningful poem, I guess, but bringing out slightly different themes to the Whitsun Weddings. How is Dockery and Son different in Larkin's exploration of fatherhood, I guess? Yeah,
so you're right, it touches on a lot of the same themes. There's more trains, there's sort of Larkin falling asleep on a train and not having the conventional life that some of his classmates had at Oxford. This has a very much more strong conclusion. It's much more pessimistic, I would say, than the Whitsun Weddings. I think that the pessimism is prompted by the realisation that a lot of life seems to have quickly passed by. It's an interesting one. Larkin talks a lot about death, and in this poem, one of the few poems where we actually have deaths, we have two deaths.
Yes.
Larkin calls himself the death-suited visitant. Somebody's died, possibly Dockery. I've never really been able to work out who, but Dockery too has been affected by death. He shared a room with Cartwright, who was killed, possibly in the war, probably in the war, which maybe prompts Dockery to have a child very young. We don't know that, but there's this sort of theme of birth and death and lineage and why we do the things we do and feel the need to do the things we do.
Yeah.
And also that Larkin is unusual, I suppose, in that he doesn't feel the need to do that. He has no son, no wife, no house or land, and it seems very natural to him. He says, but actually that prompts him to quite a negative conclusion. I wonder if it maybe starts to feel quite an uncomfortable thing to him through comparison with other people.
Yeah.
Or it could just be the awful pie James that he eats at the station that leads him to the terrible conclusion.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, he had a really odd love life. I don't know, because you're right, he didn't really have a fulfilled or satisfied long-term relationship or marriage. I mean, he had at various stages of his life overlapping lovers, at one stage 3 at a time. But these relationships must have had a significant impact on his work.
Yes, he's written several very good poems that I would refer listeners to. There's a great one called Wild Oats, about two women, one a classic, he refers to as a bosomy English rose, and a friend in specs who he could talk to. He ends up going out with a friend in specs who gives him a very honest appraisal of himself at the end of their relationship, calling him selfish, withdrawn, and too easily bored to love. So he's brave enough to put some of the harsher views of himself in his poetry. There's a lovely poem called Broadcast, I think, about him imagining a woman that he loves. I don't know if it's one of his partners, but listening to a classical concert, I think I might have misremembered, but he's listening to it on the radio.
Yes.
And he imagines her sitting in her seat and clapping with her small hands, clapping alone in the air. And it's a lovely poem, and it's quite touching. It's very like all his work. It's very understated. There's no grandiose, extended metaphors. It's simple.
Yes.
Yes.
And he hated the extended metaphors of the modernists, right? I mean, he called this the myth kitty that they all dipped into. No pun intended or anything like that. He liked kitties and myth kitties. But it referred to this shared pool of classical, historical, religious symbols that writers were constantly dipping into to construct meaning. I mean, T.S. Eliot, for example, every single line of his poem, you kind of need to know this other reference to get it, and he was on this like intellectual, almost inaccessible level of literary illusion, I guess. But Larkin said of his own poems that he wanted each of them to be its own sole, freshly created universe, which is quite an amazing statement to make. And at the time he was writing, do you think this was strange, that he was concerned with such ordinary things?
Yeah, I think that's what makes him so popular. This is before your time, James, but the BBC in I think it was the 1990s did the nation's 100 greatest poems, and Larkin features 3 times in it because his poems are very accessible to everybody, and that's not to. I think with poetry we always think of high art and great intellectualism. They don't have to be. I think Larkin shows that is that you can extract meaning from very everyday ordinary things, and that is the beauty of him, and that's why he's it sort of resonates for a lot of people, and today as well, the feeling of being an outsider. You find your feet in a Larkin poem very quickly. There's nothing that's going to turn you off at the second line where you think, I can't quite be doing this. But and small ideas. A lot of them start with sort of small talk. Dockery and Son, for example, starts with a bit of small talk between him and the Dean, and then it moves on to something a lot bigger, but still accessible. It is a shared experience of human beings, the contemplation of life and how you progress and what you've done with your life. But it starts off with small talk. Mr. Bleaney is another good one I would refer people to that starts off with small talk between him and a landlady. This is part of why I love Larkin, is because it's poetry that is not obscure and designed to be out of the reach of anybody who picks up a book and looks at it.
Well, you've sold him very well. I mean, I'm convinced to go and finish his whole collection. It's great. I guess feeding into that, as we're nearing the end now, how else would you describe his style as a poet? We've talked a bit about his tone. He's quite colloquial. What else makes Larkin Larkin? Yeah,
so you're right. It's the colloquial stuff. If I read a poem and didn't know it was Larkin, how would I pick him out? Well, what I love is his very economical use of language, the setting of a scene with tiny detail. Just a few examples: kiddies clobber, thin curtains that don't quite meet the bottom of the sill, overflowing ashtrays, lots of nylon stuff, lots of modern, what I'm not going to say tat, but it's saucer souvenirs in Mr. Bleaney that he stubs his cigarettes out on. It's consumerism. It's setting a scene with a few choice things, and not being afraid to put these things in what is great poetry that stood the test of time. It shows you don't need the grand ideas necessarily, that you can talk about things that happen to you in a day and use them to greater effect and to explore bigger ideas. So the sort of economical use of language. What I also love about him is how unsentimental he is. He's not unemotional. It's just that his emotions are very sort of understated. They're sort of hidden behind a veneer. So he's unsentimental. He never looks at anything and tries to make it better, to make himself feel better. He tends to look at things as they are. Does he look at them and make them worse? That's debatable, but it's possible. I do see where people who would find him quite pessimistic are coming from.
Well, Andrew Motion said he called it accuracy. He said Larkin's poems are marked by a very English glum accuracy. Maybe it's an English thing.
Yes, I think it's very rooted in Englishness, Britishness. I think a lot of his poems reference Englishness and the expectations of Englishness and how that shapes us. He is very well fits into that.
I feel like we didn't really move on to his librarian positions. He was at a public library in Shropshire initially, 1943, then at university libraries in Leicester from 46, Queen's in Belfast in 1950, and then finally Hull in 1955. I don't think there are that many poets of his fame that were actually he was a librarian. He was an administrator, and a very good one at that. But how did this kind of contribute to his personality, his public image, which I guess he didn't really want?
Yeah, that's right. So I think there's a strange feeling of going back, of never progressing with Larkin. So other people do other things. They get married, they have children. Larkin never quite, he's on the train with them, but there's always an element of him that never quite progresses. And I think ending up back in an educational establishment quite suited him, and definitely contributes to that sort of feeling that of sort of stasis in some ways with his life. There's some great sort of interviews with him on YouTube, talking about work. And how he has sort of a bit of a love-hate relationship with him. But ultimately, I feel that he knows himself. He's true to himself. And the library suits him very well. The administrative side, the quietness of it, being surrounded by books and other people's thoughts seems to suit him. And he knows himself.
Yes, and still relevant today, I guess. I mean, how would you say he's kind of relevant in the big 2026?
I find him very relevant. I think a lot of, we talk a lot today about alienation and not feeling like you quite belong, to the point where not belonging is sort of a kind of belonging, because it's a common theme among teenagers. I guess the point of being a teen and a young adult is that you are finding your place. So not belonging is not unusual. It's how to deal with it. Larkin seems to go through his whole life, through middle age and older age, not belonging. And I think a lot of people would identify with that. And also the parts of his life where you see people trying to fill their lives with things, with stuff.
That are ephemeral and ultimately don't give much meaning. Is that what he argues? Would you say he's a bit fatalistic, maybe?
He is fatalistic, yes. We are set off the train again. We are set off on a journey. The line has already been laid out. And we can try to make sense of it as we go along. And I think all those themes are still very relevant today. Well, they always have been, haven't they? So yes, he grounds them in a very modern sort of consumerism, which I guess is easily understood by lots of people today.
Great. A very strong note to end on, and a fitting conclusion to Philip Larkin and his work. Thank you. It's been a pleasure to have you on.
Oh, it's been lovely to be here. Thanks.
Yeah, it's. I feel like we've learned so much more from where we started, which is the best thing. So thank you so much for your time, Katrina.
Very welcome. Thank
Goodbye.
you. Bye.